Okay, so if you click on the module section of our course page, we're just working with module 6. I just want you to make sure that you understand I'm using the midterm that I posted that's called Midterm Exemplar with annotations. So if you click that document, it will bring you here. This was a previous student of mine. His name was Alex. This is a paper that he wrote about food insecurity and the issue of that subject in East Trenton, New Jersey. I am not going to go over the first portion of the paper, which stops right here. I already did that in a video down below. If you look at the bottom of Module 6, there's already a video lecture posted on the midterm hook, so you can look at that first before watching this video. What I'm going to go over is from this portion until the end of the paper. And I'm not going to go over every single detail, but I will highlight things that are important for you. Remember, the purpose of the hook, the portion above this, is to engage your audience, to start to define that problem, to briefly talk about your population. It's to really convince them that they should want to hear more and to encourage them to keep reading. So once that's done, this is when you more specifically dive into your population and problem. So after your hook, you tackle population and problem. So here Alex has a really thoughtful title. You should include titles in your midterm. His is digging deeper into Trenton, and now we know that he's going to be talking more specifically about why food insecurity is an issue in Trenton. So he's tackling two things at once, the population as well as the problem itself. So just to remind you, everything in orange is something that is cited, whether it's a direct quote or something that's paraphrased. That should give you a good idea of the amount of content that should be cited versus the amount that should be your own writing, analysis, and interpretation. So hopefully that is helpful for you. In this first little bit, he really starts by talking about how this problem manifested, and he talks about the economic disinvestment in the area, the white flight, and the suburban sprawl. So I feel like that's a really good place to start. He goes to the root of it, and then he extends, and he talks about how Trenton is finding itself sitting on opposite sides of the income spectrum, which is defined below. So if you scroll down, you will talk about how the city household median income in Trenton is about $31,000. And then he says that is $20,000 less than that of the district. And he says it is also one of the third highest incomes in the country. So if you're talking Mercer County as a whole, it's 20,000 less, and that's one of the highest incomes in the country. But you can see how Trenton is so far behind that median. So that's really highlighting the problem there. And he's bringing up finances, which is definitely a big contributor to food insecurity, and he brings that up a little bit later. So this is a devastating statistic. He says, in addition, 21% of Trenton is currently living under the poverty line. So that's a perfect place to bring that up. He's really talking a lot about, finances, how that's connected to poverty, and why that might contribute to this issue that's ongoing regarding food insecurity. Going down, he talks a lot about how there's really not a lot of sources to get nutritious food. So he talks about Trenton as being a food desert. He defines what that is. If you are unfamiliar, just very briefly, a food desert is an area where there is a lack of access to nutritional foods. Maybe there is no grocery store that's walking distance. Maybe there aren't any farmers markets. Maybe most people are getting their food from bodegas or fast food restaurants. So he really talks about that lack of nutritional food that's available. So just keep in mind that that's a really, really strong point to raise to show that this is an issue. If you can connect food insecurity to there being a food desert within this population, that is something that is a great connection to make, and it really helps establish that this is a real problem where you're focusing. So after he talks about Trenton a little bit more specifically, he has a new title. This is still his problem section. And he says, everyone is hungry. Where do we start? Once again, that title is bolded. It also helps drive his argument forward a bit more. He also talks a little bit about education in this paragraph. So he narrows it down to focusing on children. He says, first and foremost, it is vital to put children and teenagers first in the race to alleviating this problem. It goes without saying that children are the future, but without adequate amounts of food, the already existing high poverty levels, low educational standards, and he talks about how many kids graduate, and high crime rates. These are all really, really good things to bring up. He says that he really wants the kids in Trenton to prosper. And he says that these detriments of food insecurity will cause a snowball effect, and it will lead to more felonies, more unemployment, and more lack of education. You can see that he's paraphrasing here, but this is an excellent conclusion to come to. He's using a scholarly source here. He really just continues to talk about how fixing this can really revolutionize the future for Trenton. Going on, he talks about misconceptions of solving hunger. Is that money is the root of the problem, and he sort of says why this is not the case. He also kind of hints at a solution down here with this next stat. He says, although funding is important, the way food is grown, distributed, and eaten also profoundly affects the environmental, social, spiritual, and economic well-being of a community. So it's imperative to pay attention to the local food economy of an area. And that is that the system has tailored to the community's needs. And he really talks a lot about that, and he mentions the paradigm. So in these first 2 pages, including his hook, he's spending a lot of time talking about the population at hand, as well as the problem. And we are convinced that this is a problem. So remember, that's a decent length to spend in a midterm, since you only have 4 to 5 pages. I would say 2, maybe a hair more than 2. Then he transitions into his paradigm. So I'm just trying to tell you the order of things so you can try to mimic the order. That's the proper way to kind of introduce your paper. So he titles his paradigm section Parts of the Puzzle. You do not have to title it that. That was sort of his creative take on it. Sometimes students will say, models of success for food insecurity. Whatever it is you want to title it is okay with me, as long as you're suggesting that it's your research of other models that have been successful or pieces of theory that have tackled this issue. So here he has like a tiny little introduction into his models of success. And I'll quickly read that because I do think having a really tiny introduction is helpful. He says many programs have been installed in struggling areas of the world, including Trenton, in attempts to cushion the devastation that hunger can cause. Yet the explicit and implicit conflicts caused by starvation continue to see the light of day in the city. Nevertheless, these programs have all contributed a great deal to the cause and can be utilized as preliminary guidelines for my program. So you can see you're looking for other things or programs or resources or structures that were successful, and you're going to use those that are well researched and proven to be successful to build your plan. So that's his brief intro. And then he goes right into each model. And I'm not going to go through these very specifically. I'll talk to you about what should be done. But he italicizes each of his models. So you can see that if you have a subtitle, you should italicize it. So he starts with the binder project. He goes into the Trenton area soup kitchen, and then he goes to the NJ Anti-Hunger Coalition. So he has 3 models of success, which is very, very, very good. I'm hoping that you'll at least have 2. Having 1 is very underdeveloped. Sometimes people have 4 in their midterm. Just so you know, these are all very local to Trenton. They do not necessarily have to be. If you're focusing on this same issue, food insecurity in Trenton, you might find a model that works so well and it might be in Chicago. So I don't want you to feel like it has to be immediately around the area. It might turn out that way, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. In these sections, when you're explaining each model, you should, of course, make sure that you are citing. Most of the time, these types of sources for your models should be coming from scholarly sources. What you normally would do is explain how that model was structured. What did this place, the Binder Project, do to tackle food insecurity? How was it set up? And then at the very end, you'll highlight and analyze, why was it successful? How did they really help tackle this issue? How did they alleviate the issue of food insecurity? Did they run into any issues? You also want to be critical. Even though most of that program or solution may have been successful, you also want to make sure that you are criticizing maybe something that didn't work so well, and that would justify you not using that component in your own plan. So please make sure you're reading through the paradigm section just so you can get a little bit better of an idea of how that should look. You'll see that he has a very creative idea for his plan, and that is his next title. It's called A Scarlet Push Towards Improvement. Remember, his main idea is that he'll use Rutgers students and resources here to help the people in Trenton, which is why his title deals with the Scarlet Push. It's a play on Rutgers. He goes into Ways in which he wants to fix it based off of all of the research he found in his paradigm. He's not taking a solution out of nowhere. Everything is based on the research that's from the section before. And he comes up with this structure, and I'll just go over a few points. He divides it into 4 pillars, and he says, first, we'll talk about media presence. 2, we'll talk about education. 3, we'll talk about volunteering. And 4, we'll talk about fundraising. I do think it's a good idea to structure it into subjects. Some students use creative topics like that: media presence, education, volunteering, fundraising. Some students like to use just like part 1 of the plan, part 2 of the plan. Maybe it's year 1, year 2, but if you can divide it, try to divide it, but make sure that your plan is as specific as it can be. The more specific, the better it will be. And try to make sure that everything in your plan is coming from your paradigm. It shouldn't be coming out of thin air. It shouldn't be an idea you have. Everything in this plan has to be backed to work through research. So you'll see his plan is just about a page in length. We're just going down. Like I said, I scanned this wrong. I'm sorry. So if you scroll down, you'll see the plan finishes right here. This is his price. You can see he just uses a bulleted list. I'm fine with that. The only thing I would recommend here is that you have just an explanation of the price in maybe a few sentences. And the one thing that's really not great with his paper, his budget is way too high. I've spoken to a lot of you about this. The budget should never exceed $1 million. We're working with very small niche plans that deal with a smaller, more focused population. And you do not want to ever ask for more than $1 million. As a matter of fact, the lower your budget, the better. Like if it's around 100,000, that's much better than asking for 850,000. You want to try to make it reasonable, and you want to make sure that you're persuading your patron that this is a good price and that it really can go a long way. So just take a peek at that. And then you have this closing, and it's kind of like a call to action. Generally speaking, this section is a paragraph or 2, and you're just kind of doing a quick recap of everything you discussed. Sometimes students will offer a final persuasive pitch. They'll offer a final statistic just to kind of bring their whole idea home. And then what you'll do is you'll close by inviting your patron to your oral presentation. I will be giving you oral presentation dates before the midterm is due. So just keep your eyes peeled for that, and you'll end with your contact info, and then you will sign off. You all have to sign off with sincerely. You should have a signature here. Because you're all typing it, it's okay if you just use a script font for that signature. And then you'll have your name typed. So instead of Exemplar, if it were me, it would say Lauren Fedorko. So just make sure you're taking a peek at this more closely. It's extremely helpful just to look at it and see all of those annotations. If any of you want an additional exemplar, I am happy to post it. But this is something that is just useful in the process. So remember, after that, your works cited page is here. Yours will say references because you're working with APA formatting. And his, you'll see, is 1 page. And then he has his 2nd page. So just remember, you are APA, not MLA. All right, I hope that this was helpful for you. Please reach out if you have any questions.